AITA for doing nothing when my daughter-in-law humiliated my wife at our wedding? She smiled as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Then I took a slow step forward, and her father leaped to his feet with panic in his eyes. I stood in the middle of that opulent ballroom when my daughter-in-law emptied her plate of food directly onto the polished marble floor and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "If you want to stay at this wedding, then get down and eat it." My wife, Elaine, was paralyzed. The old dress she had saved for 30 years was stained. My son, Ethan, didn't stop her. He turned away as if he had never called us mom and dad. I glanced at my watch. There were 13 minutes left, and no one in that room knew who I really was. I didn't react immediately. At my age, I've learned that silence can carry more weight than any word. The string quartet in the hall continued to play, a steady, soft melody. Crystal glasses still clinked, and the scent of expensive perfume mixed with the smell of the food on the floor, creating something deeply unsettling. My wife stood there, her hands trembling slightly, unable to look down at the floor beneath her feet. The dress she was wearing, she had saved for over 30 years. I clearly remember the night she took it out of its garment bag, carefully smoothing every seam. She said she didn't need a new dress. She said memories mattered more than appearances. I nodded because I understood her. I just never imagined those memories would be stained like this in a ballroom where we were invited as the groom's parents. Chloe showed no shame. She stood tall, her lips curved into a smile I had only seen on people who treat power like a toy. Her eyes passed over my wife as if she were an unwanted piece of furniture. No apology, no hesitation, just a cold certainty, as if what she had done was completely reasonable. Around us, some guests froze mid-bite. Others looked away into their wine glasses. Some glanced at their phones. I heard the soft buzz of phones recording, the suppressed whispers. No one stepped forward. No one said this had gone too far. In that brightly lit room, my wife stood alone. Ethan was right there. My son stood next to Chloe, one hand resting on the back of a chair, avoiding his mother's eyes. I waited for a sign, even a small one, a frown, a step forward, but there was nothing. When Chloe repeated her demand, her voice slightly louder, Ethan just said quietly, "People are watching. Mom and Dad, don't make a scene." That sentence struck me in a way I didn't expect, not because of the tone, but because of how familiar it sounded. I had said similar words before in my life when I chose silence to preserve appearances. I knew the cost of that choice, and in that moment, I understood my son had chosen the same path. I bent down, not to obey an order, but to help my wife stay on her feet. The marble floor was cold, sticky. I felt the tension in her body, as if she were holding herself up by sheer force. I spoke softly, just loud enough for the two of us to hear. I told her she didn't need to look. I told her to stay still. Chloe laughed. She thought I was pleading. She thought I was an old man from a small town who didn't know his place. I didn't correct her. I was used to being underestimated. In fact, that was exactly why I was there in this old, off-the-rack suit. I looked around one more time. Perfectly made-up faces, tuxedos rented just for the night. Everyone was there for an image. No one wanted to shatter it. I understood that, but I also knew there are moments when, if you don't draw a line, silence becomes complicity. Ethan approached. He didn't look at his mother. He looked at me. His eyes held no anger or pity, just impassiveness. "Dad," he said, "this is my wedding." I nodded. I knew exactly where I was. I knew the time. I knew the schedule. I glanced at my watch again. The minute hand kept moving, indifferent to anyone's feelings. In my mind, other things began to fall into place. Calls from my office I hadn't answered. Encrypted messages I hadn't opened, not out of fear, but because I wanted to see how far this would go. My wife finally lifted her gaze. There was no accusation in her eyes, only exhaustion. I understood then that her deepest pain wasn't the floor or the dress. It was standing there watching the son she had spent sleepless nights caring for, now treating her humiliation as a reasonable choice. I put my hand on her shoulder a little more firmly, not to comfort her, but to tell her I was still there. I said nothing to Chloe. I didn't need to. People like her always believe they control everything until things stop working the way they're used to. The music continued to play. The laughter slowly returned. The party tried to regain its earlier rhythm, but for me, something had already closed. When I looked at the stain on my wife's dress, I knew I had just witnessed the final line being crossed. And I also knew that from that moment on, I would no longer stay quiet just to please anyone. I thought that after that moment, things would calm down. I was wrong. When a boundary is crossed without an immediate response, people often push even further. Ethan suggested we go outside for some air. The words sounded like advice, but his eyes said something else. He glanced around the ballroom before looking at us, as if the top priority at that moment was the party's perfect image. I understood that I too had once been in a place where I weighed people against appearances. I just never thought my son would use that tone with his own mother. They led us down a narrow service corridor behind the main ballroom. No one accompanied us. No one asked questions. The sound of the celebration was sealed behind thick, soundproof doors. In the smaller space, I could clearly hear my wife's breathing. It was ragged, held back, as if she feared that letting out even a single sound would make everything crumble. The table they sat us at was near the kitchen entrance. Not because there was no space. I saw empty tables in the main hall. This was a deliberate choice. Chloe stood with her arms crossed. Her voice was low but sharp enough to cut the air. She said it would be more convenient for everyone there. She said important guests were live streaming and that inappropriate images should be avoided. I didn't ask what inappropriate meant. I already knew. Elaine sat down, placing her handbag on her lap with her hands tightly clasped. I saw her looking at her shoes, old but carefully polished. I remembered she had cleaned them early that morning in our small hotel room. She had said she wanted everything to be appropriate, because today was an important day for our son. Ethan stood before us, his back slightly bent forward. He started speaking faster, as if afraid someone might overhear. He said everything was already arranged, that we no longer had to worry about the old place. When I asked what he meant, he hesitated for only a fraction of a second and then said it clearly. He had sold our family home back in Ohio. The words didn't boom. They landed softly, but deeply. I didn't ask when he sold it or for how much. I knew those details no longer mattered. The only thing I wanted to understand was why. Ethan said the house no longer served a purpose. He said the money was needed for a down payment to maintain the lifestyle they were building. He spoke like someone explaining a reasonable business decision. Elaine said nothing, simply closing her eyes for a few seconds, and I understood that in that moment, she hadn't lost a house. She had lost a place to return to in her thoughts, an anchor she believed still existed no matter how life changed. Chloe interjected, saying the closing documents were already signed. She said we didn't have to worry because from now on, Ethan had his own family. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had a definitive coldness, like a judge's gavel. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I needed to keep the situation from spiraling out of control in a way that served no purpose. I saw Ethan relax, thinking the matter had been accepted. He didn't know that for me. This wasn't a blow. It was a confirmation. My phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. I didn't take it out. I knew who was calling. I knew why. Those calls had started the moment we entered the ballroom, and I had let them go to voicemail. Not out of fear, but because I wanted to see how far this would go. This wasn't the time to intervene. It was the time to understand. Elaine finally spoke. She didn't blame Ethan. She just asked one small question. Do you remember what your father and I did to buy that house? Ethan fell silent. Chloe looked away. That question didn't need an answer. I placed my hand on the table. The stainless steel surface was cold. I took out my phone and took a picture, not out of anger. I photographed the food still on the floor, the stain on my wife's dress that hadn't yet dried. I did it slowly, openly. Ethan saw it. His eyes flickered. He asked what I was doing. I said I was just saving a memory. At that moment, I felt something very clearly. The forgiveness I had always believed could bring people back together had reached its end. Not because of the money, not because of the humiliation, but because of the indifference disguised as reason. I stood up. No one stopped us. No one asked where we were going. From the ballroom up front, the music swelled again. A new song began, lighter, more cheerful. I glanced at my watch. Time kept moving forward in its fair and indifferent way, and I knew that when the minute hand reached its mark, the silence I had carried since the beginning of that night would no longer be necessary. I didn't immediately return to the main ballroom. I stood at the edge of the kitchen area, where the lighting was softer and the music faded into a dim background. Elaine sat with her back straight, but tired. I saw her breathing slow down. I knew she was trying not to fall apart in front of our son. I was doing the same. The minute hand drew closer. I didn't need to check my phone to know the calls were coming in faster. I knew who was calling and why they were getting impatient. Schedules are something I have always respected. When a time marker arrives, things move to another phase. Not because of emotion, but because of order. Just then, the large glass doors at the entrance of the ballroom swung open. I heard a different sound fill the room. Not laughter, but the sound of attention shifting. A fleet of black SUVs had pulled up to the covered entrance. Clean, controlled, without noise or fanfare, they appeared as if they had always been there, arriving at just the right moment. I didn't step forward. I didn't need to. The people who got out of the vehicles scanned the room for a brief second. Then their eyes found me where I stood with my wife. Some guests paused, adjusted their jackets, lowered their voices. I saw the shift clearly. Not fear, but recognition. The string quartet faltered and then stopped. No signal was given. The musicians simply understood that this was no longer the time to continue. The guests turned their heads. More phones were raised, but the smiles had vanished. Ethan leaped up from the main table. Chloe followed him, her expression tense. They looked at the newcomers, then at me. I saw confusion flash across Ethan's face very briefly. Chloe was different. She tried to maintain her smile, but her eyes lost their certainty. She was searching for something familiar to hold on to, and found nothing. Chloe's father came forward from the front row. I remembered him. We had met in boardrooms where numbers mattered more than names. He looked at me, and I saw his shoulders drop. He walked faster, and then stopped a few feet away. His voice was low, not because of the crowd, but because he knew exactly who he was with. He said my name, not loud, not formal, just enough for Chloe to hear. I didn't answer immediately. I looked at Elaine first. I needed to know she was steady. She gave a slight nod. That was enough. My associates approached. They didn't crowd in. They formed a loose circle, keeping a proper distance. No one bowed. No one put on an act. They simply inclined their heads like people who understood the order of the room had changed. One of them, my chief counsel, apologized for being late. I nodded. That was all. For a few brief seconds, silence settled over the ballroom. Chloe looked at her father, expecting reassurance, but he didn't look at her. He looked at me. Ethan looked at me, then at the people standing around, as if piecing together a picture he had avoided his entire life. I walked out of the service corridor, not quickly, not slowly. I put my hand on the back of the nearest chair and stood where everyone could see me. I didn't introduce myself. I didn't need to. Those who needed to know already knew. Those who didn't were learning. I said a single, clear sentence, enough for the front rows to hear. I said I was there for my son's wedding. I said I had come with my wife. I said nothing more. I let the rest of the truth reveal itself through the gazes that were now shifting direction. Chloe's father finally spoke again. His voice trembled not with fear, but with the understanding that old agreements had just been reset. He spoke of loans, of development projects on hold, of approaching SEC deadlines. He spoke like a man trying to pull an emergency brake that had already failed. I listened. I always listen before I decide. When he finished, I only said that today was a wedding day. I said I wasn't there to discuss business. That sentence made Chloe exhale softly as if she had just been granted a reprieve. I let that feeling exist for one more beat. Then I looked at Ethan. I asked my son if the people standing there looked familiar to him. Ethan swallowed, shook his head. I nodded. I said that was fine. Some relationships don't need to be acknowledged until they become unavoidable. I turned back to Elaine. I saw her standing straighter now. Her eyes were no longer wandering. They had found their anchor for the first time all night. I put my hand on hers. I felt the calm slowly return. In that moment, I knew things had moved to another phase. Not because I had said something grand, but because everyone around us had quietly adjusted their position. The wealth in that room was still there, but the center of gravity had changed. And when that changes, what follows no longer requires threats or anger. I glanced at my watch. The minute hand hit its mark. I took a deep breath. The silence I had carried since the start of that night had served its purpose. I knew that what came next wouldn't need to be said aloud for everyone to understand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to ask for silence. The room adjusted on its own. The people closest took half a step back, just enough to create space between Ethan and me. I looked at my son, and for the first time that night, he didn't avoid my eyes. I took an envelope from the inner pocket of my jacket. It wasn't thick, it was neat, prepared in advance. I placed it on the nearest table, right under the light. I said it was a wedding gift. I said I had planned to give it after the speech, like a normal father would. I didn't mention the amount. I didn't need to. Ethan knew. So did Chloe. I opened the envelope and took out the cashier's check, holding it just long enough for the phone cameras to capture the moment. Then I folded it once, then again. Not quickly, not forcefully, just definitively. I placed the folded paper on the table. I stated clearly that this gift was no longer appropriate for this evening. There were no loud murmurs, just held breaths. Ethan took a step forward as if to speak. Then he stopped. Chloe clutched the sleeve of her designer wedding dress. I saw a calculation flash across her face. Quick, instinctive. I turned to Chloe's father. I said that the pending investments would be reviewed tomorrow morning. I said the unsigned contracts for the merger would remain on pause. I didn't use the word canceled. I said paused. In our world, those two words carry very different weights. He understood. I saw it in the slight tremor of his hand. Ethan asked what I was doing. His voice was no longer steady. I said I was doing what I should have done sooner. I said that financial support only makes sense when it comes with respect. I added that from this moment on, all prior financial assistance would be subject to a full audit, not as a punishment, but to clarify boundaries. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Chloe intervened. She said this was her wedding day. I nodded. I said that was true, and precisely for that reason, I would do nothing to turn this night into a scene. I said that every decision I had just mentioned was legal and would be handled through our respective attorneys after the ceremony. I said that tonight. I just wanted one thing corrected. I looked at Elaine's dress. The stain was still there, untouched. No one had offered a napkin or a glass of water. I said that this dress was the only thing in this room that couldn't be replaced with money. I said it not to Chloe, but to the entire room. I turned to Chloe. I spoke very slowly. I said that if she truly wanted to start this marriage with a shred of decency, she could clean the stain she had caused with her own hands. I didn't give an order. I didn't use the word must. I said could. I said there was a decorative water fountain in the corner of the ballroom. I said the choice was hers. The room held its breath. Chloe looked around, searching for a way out. Her father didn't look at her. Ethan stood motionless as if understanding for the first time that not everything could be solved with silence. After several very long seconds, Chloe nodded. She walked to the fountain. No one laughed. No one applauded. I didn't allow the moment to become entertainment. I stood beside Elaine. I didn't let her move forward. I didn't want her to see more than necessary. A staff member gave Chloe linen towels and a bowl of water. Chloe knelt carefully, her hands trembling slightly. I didn't watch closely. I didn't need to. While that was happening, I told Ethan we would be leaving early. I said it was best for everyone. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. I saw something break in his eyes, silently but truly. Perhaps for the first time, he understood that what he called saving face had cost more than he imagined. When Chloe returned, the dress was cleaner, though not perfect. I nodded. I said, "Thank you." I said that everyone is given a chance to fix things, and they choose for themselves if and when they will take it. I said nothing more. I didn't need to. I took Elaine's hand. Her hand was warmer now. We turned and left the ballroom. No one stopped us. No one called out to us. The music did not resume. The glass doors closed softly behind us. Outside, the city air was cooler. I took a deep breath. I knew what had just happened would be talked about for a long time. But for me, the most important part of that night was already over. Not with the folded check or the paused merger, but with the moment I chose not to let silence keep hurting the person I love. We walked slowly to where the driver was waiting. I didn't look back. I didn't need to know how chaotic everything was behind us. What needed to be exposed had been exposed enough. The rest I left to time and the choices they would make. We didn't go back to the hotel right away. Elaine said she wanted to breathe a little longer. I understood. Nights like that need a pause, like water settling after a stone has been dropped into it. We sat in the back of the town car with no music. The city outside was still bright, still busy as if nothing had happened. I liked that feeling. It reminded me that no matter how heavy a family story is, the world keeps moving in its fair and silent way. Elaine leaned her head back against the leather seat. She didn't cry. I have always known her strength. She said very softly that the dress had come out cleaner than she expected. I took her hand. I told her it wasn't the dress that had kept her standing tonight. She smiled, tired but light. That smile was enough to tell me we had done the right thing. The next morning I woke up early. a habit built over many years of market openings. I made coffee, opened the window of our suite, and let the cool air in. I didn't call anyone. I let things move according to the order I had set. What I decided last night wasn't impulsive. It was the result of a line being crossed too many times. When a boundary is reset, things become simpler. I authorized a significant donation to a charitable foundation that supports elderly people living alone in our home state. Quietly, with no press release. I chose that fund because I've met the people there, people who live quietly and with dignity, asking for nothing more than respect. I thought of Elaine. I thought of the hands that had held mine for so many years. Money, when it goes to the right place, knows how to be silent. Ethan called around noon. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Not out of anger. I just needed time so that any words I might say later would not cause more harm. I believe some lessons are only understood when there's no one beside you to explain them. I didn't block his number. I didn't call back either. I left the door open in the truest sense of the word. Open, but not easy to cross. We took a flight back to Ohio that afternoon. It's not large, our house. The familiar smell of the old wood welcomed us. Elaine hung up the dress carefully. She didn't push it to the back of the closet. She said she wanted to let it air out. I nodded. Memories, when faced directly, feel lighter than when they are hidden. We made a simple dinner, tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches. Nothing special, but I noticed we ate more slowly, listening to the spoon touch the bowl more clearly. On nights like these, I think about what I've traded in life. I used to believe that protecting a child by cushioning every impact was love. Last night showed me that love is sometimes knowing when to let them feel the fall. Elaine asked if I had any regrets. I shook my head. I said I regretted staying silent for too long. She put her hand on mine, said nothing more. We understood each other without needing explanations. In the following days, I heard fragments through my office. The merger that had been paused was officially called off, not out of spite, but to give everyone time to reflect on their priorities. Ethan and Chloe moved out of the luxury condo. They rented a smaller apartment. I didn't follow it closely. I didn't need to. I believe everyone learns at their own pace. One afternoon, we sat on the porch swing. The sun was low. A light breeze passed by. Elaine brought out a plate of homemade cookies. I took a bite, just sweet enough. I said, money can build an opulent ballroom, but it can't buy respect. Elaine nodded. She said, respect, when it's protected, can sustain an entire family. I looked at the house, the small garden we tended together. I felt I no longer needed anything to prove a point. The right decisions don't need an audience. They need peace to survive. The night came slowly. We cleaned up, turned off the lights. Before going inside, I looked at the sky, no city glow, just distant stars. I felt my thoughts settle. For me, this story didn't end in that luxurious ballroom. It ended here, with two old people sitting side by side, understanding that roots aren't kept strong with money, but with boundaries and with kindness. Comment. What a powerful story about the quiet strength found in self-respect. It reminds us that setting boundaries isn't an act of aggression, but a necessary act of self-preservation. For too long, silence can be mistaken for acceptance, causing pain we never intended. True kindness sometimes requires us to be firm to protect what is truly valuable. The most profound healing can begin when we finally give ourselves permission to say, enough. We can't control how others treat us, but we always hold the power to define what we will accept. We owe that responsibility to ourselves and to the people we love. Choosing peace often means moving through a difficult moment to reach lasting tranquility. May we all learn to honor our own dignity with courage and grace. If you like the stories, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.